This is Cultural Geography. In case you forgot what class you were in, we are starting week 5 in our notes today. So hopefully you've turned in both homework assignments, a quiz, and the Chapter 18 test in your week 4 packet. Now we are starting Chapter 19 in our notes. In your week 5 packets, you should have gotten along with anything that we'll be assigning the cultural metaphor for chapter 19. We're actually starting with that first. So please make sure that you have your handout, your cultural metaphor for this. Remember, I am using the book Understanding Global Cultures by Michael J. Gannon to cover the materials, cultural metaphors, taking a unique object from their culture and applying it to the people. So let's get started. The sub-Saharan African bush taxi. Reading the quote from R. Kapuscinski in 2001, finally a small Toyota van pulled up. These vehicles are built to seat 12, but here they accommodate more than 30 passengers. It is difficult to describe the number and nature of all the additions, the welded-on extensions, the little benches inside such a bus. When it is full, for one passenger to either get out or get in, all the others must do so as well. The intricate calibration of the internal arrangements is as tight and precise as the workings of a Swiss watch, and whoever occupies a place must take into account the fact that for the next several hours, for all intents and purposes, he will not be able to move so much as a toe. So let's get started. First of all, some information about what an African bush taxi is. A bush taxi may be a car, van, or a truck. No matter what it is intended to be filled. They're also always privately owned. Ownership of private vehicles is limited due to economic conditions. Travel is difficult. There are few paved roads, and all roads are poorly maintained. They seldom, if ever, operate on a fixed schedule. The bush taxis come and go as they please. They are usually overcrowded and are almost always in poor condition. Owning a bush taxi is a big investment, and these taxis will not go until they are filled up. It is also expensive to repair any vehicles at all. Behind the seeming chaos of Africa, there is an ordered structure bound by conventions and rules. These rules may not be immediately obvious to the outsider, but they are there. Africans seldom travel light. The bush taxi transports people and goods. People returning to their villages may bring pots, pans, sacks of produce or grain, chickens or goats, bags of cement or furniture. For Africans, safety is not a concern for most bush taxi drivers. For instance, 2 tourists, having seen cars driving the wrong way on Nigerian freeways, were concerned about safety in taking a night bus. They were reassured by the owner of the bus that at night the cars stay off the road. The buses are so big and powerful they crush any cars in their path. Another tourist once asked his driver to slow down. The driver, insulted by such a request, went faster and more recklessly. The importance of bush taxis varies from one country to another. This cultural metaphor applies to multiple countries, not just one, with somewhat different cultures. Yet the sub-Saharan African bush taxi does successfully provide information to this region of Africa. By the way, students, just clarification, when I say sub-Saharan, we're talking about the parts of Africa that's to the south of the Sahara Desert. So southern Africa is where we are focusing on this chapter. Rule number 1, the first characteristic of sub-Saharan Africans is the time orientation and fatalism. As mentioned before, the African bush taxis do not operate on any fixed schedule. It is normal for people to arrive early in the morning for a departure and then spend the entire day waiting for their transport to leave. In Africa, time is certainly not money. Gasoline is money. Here in America, we always say the phrase, time is money. Well, in Africa, no, gasoline is money. A bush taxi will wait for hours until it is filled with paying passengers before going. Leaving with an unoccupied seat is a waste of money. People will wait patiently until the taxi is filled. Once that happens, the scene suddenly changes. The calm is shattered, and there'll be a frantic haste to get away as people scramble for their seats and the taxi pulls away, often with several passengers running after the moving vehicle. There's also a sense that what will be, and there is little an individual can do about it. This sense of fatalism helps people to wait patiently or react calmly when something bad happens. There's a phrase in Arabic that says inshallah, which means God willing. Sub-Saharan Africa has been greatly impacted by the religion of Islam. The aspect of Islam where the believers put their trust in Allah with everything that happens depending on Allah's willingness to let it happen. To the people, decisions are out of their hand and literally rest with God. Africans find it easier to accept the hand fate has dealt them. Americans, on the other hand, feel they can control their destiny. Many Americans find it difficult accepting the news that they have an incurable disease. There's a sense of being cheated or let down. But in Africa, it is simply accepted. In life, there are 5 divisions of order of importance: God, ancestors, man, animals and plants, and then inanimate objects. In some parts of Africa, it is common when drinking a beverage to pour a small amount onto the ground as an offering to the ancestors. The ancestors are an everyday presence. To most Africans, God is the supreme being, but ancestors and the past define man. Man is at the center of the universe, but has responsibilities to maintain balance and order in the universe. When people die, time does not come to an end. They live on as spirits. Future events are simply potential events, but actual events are what has already taken place and are more important. Africans tend to look backward rather than forward, and thus there is not the same belief in progress and improvement that characterizes Western thought. There is a living past, and time is more cyclical than linear. People who see time as a linear progression are likely to be more time conscious than those who see time as a repeating cycle. Fate lies in the hands of a living and omnipotent God. This can apply to any of the major religious groups in Africa: Islam, Christianity, etc. Most Africans are tolerant of religious freedom, but they cannot understand atheism. To most Africans, they can understand if a person is a Christian, a Muslim, a Hindu, a Buddhist, but it would be crazy to be an atheist. Because humans are not the ultimate arbiters of their fate, there is little point in planning for the future. People who believe in an all-powerful God are more likely to be less time-conscious than people who believe in their own power to influence events. As Christians, we need to be conscious of both. God is all-powerful, but he has given man a free will to make choices. The reason for this is so that we have the choice to please God. Fatalism does not mean complete futility. Rather, it means dignity in the face of adversity and humility in the event of prosperity. A quote from the book says, "No matter how conscientiously a man may perform his duties, he may fail or suffer, whereas some men who are worthless or evil may prosper." Planning and regularity become less important to Africans. However, as Africans become more westernized and urbanized, Africans subscribe more to Western concepts of time and doing. Africans have a more relaxed view of time than Americans or Europeans. They tend to be polychromic, often working on several tasks at the same time. A consequence of this could be that it may take many meetings to arrange a deal, and patience in taking the time to get to know partners is important. To many Africans, deadlines may be flexible, and there is no offense should be taken if people arrive late for meetings. In fact, important people are expected to arrive late for meetings or events. In fact, the more important the personage, the later he will turn up. How many of you guys are familiar with being late to things? Well, maybe it's because you know how important you are and you understand the cultural aspect that I need to be late to things because that shows how important I am. Don't be late to school. Number 2, Roman numeral 2, communalism and community sharing. An African bush taxi is an intimate experience. People are crammed into the bush taxi. In the mainly tropical regions, maintaining personal hygiene is difficult. Food is readily shared among passengers, and there are frequent stops along the way. It is impolite not to offer to share your meal with your fellow passengers, and only slightly less impolite to refuse an offer. It is not just food or drink that are shared, for example. An American Peace Corps volunteer ended up holding a stranger's baby for the duration of the trip. Passengers are expected to pay, but exceptions are made. However, if the taxi picks up a paying passenger, usually the non-paying passenger will have to get off. In some places, non-paying passengers are allowed to cling to the outside of the bush taxi or ride on the roof. Communalism is a strong trait in African culture. Land ownership is an important view. There was once in history a massive deportation crisis that took place. In 1983, 1.3 million Ghanaians were deported suddenly from Nigeria. The expected refugee crisis never materialized, as the deportees were quickly reassimilated by their families in Ghana. This shows an example of the strength of the African family. They are expected to take care of several distant relatives. The extended family is cared for more extensively than in the U.S. or Europe. The concept of family sharing has been seen by some as an impediment to entrepreneurship and enterprise. The more successful the person is, the more he is expected to give back to the family. This is not an incentive for an individual to work hard and try to be successful and wealthy in life, because he will have to give most of that wealth to poor family members. African sense of community extends beyond the family to the village. The village is seen almost as an extended family. When Africans are asked where they are from, they will typically give the name of their village. For a person born in a city, they will still name their parents' or grandparents' village, even if they personally have never been there themselves. There's very little personal space. In Africa, the people cram together. By contrast, a local politician in Virginia opposed the proposed installation of bench-style seating in Washington, D.C. Metro because people might be forced to establish eye contact with their fellow passengers. Ooh, terrible sounding. Rather, Africans are comfortable with physical contact. Handshakes are long, often accompanied by backslapping. Privacy is not well understood, and uninvited guests are normal. Doors are left open, and friends and neighbors often arrive uninvited to pass an evening. In Africa, there are no fences, boards, or wires, no hedges, nets, ditches, or demarcation lines anywhere. The space is single, communal, open, transparent even. There are no screens in it, no erected barriers, dams, and walls. It puts up no limits, offers no resistance. Definitely the opposite of the traditional British house with their walls and invited good friends only mentality. Collectivism means people belong to tightly woven in-groups. African cultures are collectivistic. In a survey of countries concerning cultural individualism, West Africa scored a 20 and East Africa scored a 27. The U.S., on the other hand, scored a 91. In business, relationships are more important than the job at hand, yet this sense of community can be applied to work as well, and managers are expected to take care of their employees. When a company is forced to lay off workers, the managers are expected to help the fired workers as best they can. That's all the material we're going to cover for today. Remember, this is your first video of week 5. Hope you have a good rest of the day. Be good, do good. Bye.